Well, welcome everybody. We're so happy to have Cara with us tonight, Cara Morris, and you just joined Montessori Australia as relationships manager.
I
But that's not
did.
your only job. What are the other things that you do as well?
So I'm a bit of jack of all trades at the moment. So fundamentally, my original position was with the Building Futures team. So I come from a long daycare background. I have been part of that crew now for 16 years, working originally from an assistant level to group leader, jumping over to the training college where I worked as a college manager, course developer. And most recently, I've actually just relocated from Brisbane up to North Queensland to Cairns, and so that makes it a little bit difficult to, be on the floor in a position which requires face to face. So I'm still working for Building Futures remotely, and I'm now working in a publicity and proficiency role there. So basically, just promoting the work of Montessori and the work that Building Futures does in the Montessori world. I do work for Montessori Australia as well as their relationships manager, and I'm really, really enjoying that job. It's really wonderful to have a role which is based on connection and people and spreading the word of love of Montessori. And most recently, also, I've joined the Montessori Children's Foundation team up here in Cairns. So, Montessori Children's Foundation is a foundation which has been running for quite a while now, and it's about embedding Montessori practices in our ATSI communities. And so I work as a mentor for the Montessori Children's Foundation. Up here currently we have a playgroup, a parent toddler playgroup, which runs 3 days a week, which is facilitated by First Nations women who have also completed Montessori training. And I'm just there as a background mentor, just navigating the world of playgroup. And we've got some really big and amazing projects that are on the horizon with MCF as well, which I'm sure we can talk about a little bit later as well. So yeah, I've got 3 positions at the moment, and they're all about Montessori.
Wow,
Yeah,
exciting.
really love it. Yeah.
But how did you get started in Montessori? What's your Montessori story? I always love
Ah,
hearing stories because we all come to it very kind of um,
yeah,
circuitously.
absolutely. And I was just saying to Mark earlier, I feel like my background story is a little bit long and convoluted, but it's a bit of a tapestry. And I feel like if I don't tell it in its entirety, it kind of doesn't really present why I'm here and how I came to be here. But anyway, let's go on for a long-winded,
Okay.
self-serving story. So
Yeah.
I grew up in the Western Downs. So for those who are familiar with Queensland locations, Western Downs is to the southwest of Brisbane in a very, very, very small town called Tara. So Tara's population is approximately, I would say, about 1,000 people. So incredibly small, tight-knit community. And I went to a very, very small state school there called Tara School, and I graduated with the children that I start with in kindy. So it's a P to 12 school. So we were very blessed in the sense that those who we finished with, we literally started with in kindy. It was like 2 year levels, and we all went through the whole school system together. Yeah, so very, very unheard
Great.
of to be in
Yeah.
that system. And it has its pros and cons, mostly pros. Um, School was really, really interesting for me. It came easy in the sense that I'm not a shy person and I love being around people. However, I didn't do particularly well academically, particularly in my primary school years. I was always that person on the report card whereby it was Cara would do very well if she applied herself, or Cara would do very well if she would stop talking in class, right? And one day I would love to do a survey to teachers and go, approximately how many of us actually had that on our report cards? Because I think, like, if
Yeah.
I look around the room right now, and if you're a teacher, I bet you had that written at one stage on your report card.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Anyway, it was a really, really wonderful schooling experience. I guess the only real deficit is back in the 90s, and I don't know, maybe it potentially is still the case today. We had teachers who would come out and complete their first year of teaching out in the bush. It was kind of like a numbered system where you had to complete so many points to get your school of preference. And so we had a lot of teachers who came out to do rural service who did not necessarily specialize in their area that they were teaching. So I found as I grew up, there was a lot of gaps in my learning. And I think it was a lot to do that, like really young, inexperienced teachers. But at the same time, we had a lot of passionate young folk coming out who were not burnt out yet. So there was a couple of pros and cons there. So as I said, I kind of struggled through that system. And Something that was really interesting that I've kind of reflected back on my time now as an adult is I was probably only a B or C student back then, but I was invited to be part of the gifted and talented program within our school. So I'm not entirely sure whether that's still a thing today, but schools would allocate a teacher who was in charge of the gifted and talented program, and they would facilitate additional learning away from the classroom. And I mean, we all suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome, but I genuinely don't know why I was there, in the sense that I'm not a very academic learner. The program was definitely for the smart kids on the book. But, you know, in hindsight now, I think it was because they could see my potential, but obviously the classroom experience just wasn't for me. And it's really interesting as I do look back on it now. It was always on a Tuesday afternoon that we would go out of the mainstream classroom and go to this gifted and talented program. And it was a really, really interesting experience, because it wasn't like we just went to a classroom and we were taught. Generally, what was happening was we were taken outside, it was on a picnic bench or it was on a rug on the floor, and there was like supervision, and it was learning through doing and learning through manipulation. And a lot of the experiences that we had were often board games or manipulatives using MAB blocks or like little critters. And I kind of think now, as I reflect back, is that they saw that I was a hands-on learner and that I just wasn't quite in the system that our state schools and just, I guess, our curriculum in general facilitates and markets to. And I think that was my first experience to Montessori, and I just didn't know it was Montessori back then. You know, manipulating the MABs, crafting items out of Meccano sets and Lego, and lots of board games and lots of hands-on activities. So I continued through that gifted and talented program. That's where I really thrived. And so going back to the classroom, it just wasn't me. I didn't like it. I never really fit into that system. And I think the other light bulb moment for me in terms of being a Montessorian but didn't realize a Montessorian yet was, does anyone else remember the Tournament of the Minds competitions that were really popular in the 90s and the 2000s? That was my jam. So Tournament of the Minds, who are, for folks who are unfamiliar with it, it was a extracurricular activity that was within, it was definitely national, but maybe potentially every school wasn't running it, where it was a competition, an academic competition that focused on objectives. So I quickly went on the website earlier to see if it was still running and to try and describe it. So this is how they describe the Tournament of the Minds, right? So the objectives are: provide a stimulating, real, open-ended challenge, develop creative problem-solving approaches and techniques, foster cooperative learning and teamwork, promote knowledge and appreciation of self and others, encourage experimentation and risk-taking, expand on and reward creative and divergent thinking. You know, like I'm sitting here as I'm going through this going, sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? So I completed the Tournament of Minds every year, like from between that and my gifted and talent program. That's where I found my place when it came to learning. It was so fun. It was incredibly hands-on. It was mixed disciplinary, collaborative learning, Montessori. Anywho, so I continued on those paths. I was a yes person at school. I was a prefect. I was a charity captain, sports captain, did debating, public speaking. Any opportunity I had to get out of the classroom, I did it. You'll have to excuse my toddler in the background. I just said to Mark, he usually pops in during these sessions to say hello. So he's at the door going, why am I not in this room today? Anywho, around about grade 11 is where things kind of turned for me academically. I went, you know what, if I'm going to go into university or do something one day, I need to put my head in and actually start trying at school. So I decided, well, okay, it's time to start learning. And I never had a sit-down conversation with anyone where they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't ever remember that happening, because I was just always going to be a teacher. I'm a teacher. I'm going to be a teacher, and no one ever really questioned that. So I didn't really consider any occupation. That's all I really, really wanted to do. So finished school. As I said to you before, I went to a state school, which had its pros and cons. The biggest con was, as I said, it was small. We had a class size of about 25 children, 25 adolescents in grade 12, of which what I didn't explain was it was an agricultural college too. So I grew up out west. It was ag based. There was only a handful of us who were on the trajectory to go to university. And so back then we were operating on the OP system, so overall position system. And for those of you who are familiar with the OP system, it's incredibly flawed. So what happens is you get a mark at the end of your schooling years, which is based on your results in year 11 and 12, and an exit exam. And it's unfortunately embedded within a bell curve system. So how your class performs and how your peers perform, unfortunately, will dictate how you perform in the long run. I wasn't too concerned. By that stage, I was getting Bs. I was doing not too bad academically. I did very well on the examination itself at the end. But unfortunately, the bell curve system kicked me on the other direction, and I didn't get the OP I needed to go into university straight away. And it was an absolute dagger to the heart, because I was going to become a teacher. I'm going to be a high school teacher. That's all I've ever dreamed of being, right? And there was a lot of a line there, because it wasn't just about my occupation, it was also my boyfriend. So, you know, my husband, was my boy, we're high school sweethearts. We were both going to move to Townsville together and go to James Cook University and start our studying years together. But unfortunately, I didn't get into uni. And so I was suddenly at this crossroad going, what am I going to do? I genuinely don't know what's next for me. And so I jumped on, I think back then it was the QTAR, I don't know, however we decided what course we were going to go into, and went, okay, what can I get into with the OP that I'm provided with? And I researched away on the old dial-up internet back then and did as much research as I could. And the best pathway for me to enter university was actually to go to TAFE. And once again, like I said, a long convoluted story that I'm telling here, but this is part of that junction that put me on the trajectory that I'm in today. And so I decided, okay, going to go to TAFE. I guess working with children is going to be the best way to get through. I'm going to go and do a Certificate 3 in, back then it was called Children's Services. Nowadays it's Early Childhood Education and Care. And from what I could see in my research, if I studied a year-long Certificate 3, it would up my GPA score, I think it was called back then, and I would get into university in the following year. So in 2003, at 16 years old, I moved up to Townsville, enrolled in TAFE, and I started my Certificate 3. And I was a little bit cocky in the sense that I look back now and I just feel like slapping myself, you know, I'm like, why, you know, why am I here? You know, I should be at uni now. But I after a few weeks, I'm like, actually, I'm really enjoying this. This is actually really, really enjoyable. And as part of the program, you had to go and do practicum, obviously in a childcare centre. And I entered this childcare space and went, oh, I quite like little people. Little people are actually fantastic and far more entertaining than high schoolers. So I flogged through that for 6 months and managed to get my GPA up quicker than having to do it in the full year. And mid-year in 2004, by this stage, I was able to enter uni. And so I started at that time, as I mentioned, I was going to become a high school teacher. And so I enrolled in a Bachelor of Social Sciences, specialising in archaeology and anthropology, with the goal to become a history teacher in the long run. And so I did that for 6 months. And then I realized that, you know what, I don't really want to work with high school kids after that experience with early childhood. So come the following year, when it came to jumping into a Bachelor of Education, I decided to do primary education instead. And that was great. I really, really enjoyed it. I worked in OSH during those years and just really enjoyed being part of the primary community. And this is where the sliding door moment comes. So all that preface now is at James Cook University. It's a really great university for real world learning, in the sense that I know so many people who are currently studying an education degree that don't actually step into a classroom until their third year for prac. And I cannot understand how you get to the third year and then potentially walk in and go, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. And you're already in your third year and you've blown half your course. So I was very blessed that from day one, we were in the classrooms. They did that incredibly well up there. And during the 4-year course, I was on practicum at least once a term. And every single prac, I was allocated grade 7. Like, oh gosh, okay. So back then, grade 7 was still in primary school. So it came to my 4th year, and what was I allocated? Grade 7. Like, no, not doing it. I can't come out of this degree only knowing how to teach grade 7. So I approached my school, the coordinator at the time, and said, look, I've had grade 7 every prac. Can I please have a younger year this year? And I was allocated grade 1. And I was like, yes, finally I can work with little people again. This is fantastic. Except for it wasn't fantastic. So the prac teacher that I was originally allocated as a grade 7 teacher, beautiful, wonderful, loving, nurturing, great. The grade 1 teacher that I then had was the exact opposite of that. And it was evident from from day one, that her and I were not on the same page when it came to education. We just did not click. We had completely different teaching styles. So, as I said, it's too bad, so sad. I mean, my 4th year now, the practicum in your 4th year is a full 6 months. It's essentially an internship where you're guiding the ship you were teaching that year. So the practicum teacher that I had at that time, she was on a clear path to becoming a school leader. So she was working her way up the food chain, I guess you could say, to become a principal. And I genuinely didn't see her. So she was always out of the office. She was always in meetings. I kind of just winged it the best I could. And it kind of worked until it didn't work. And there was this one pivotal moment in my career that put me on the path for Montessori. So she came down one day and she said, okay, Cara, I need you tomorrow to teach the children the concept of volume. You're going to be working through half, full, and empty. I'm like, oh, no worries, easy. And so on the drive home that afternoon, I was like, how am I going to do this? Okay. So I got home and I thought, I'm going to do a hands-on activity because that's how I learn. And I ran around my shared house and I conjured up as many bottles and liquid containing containers as I could possibly find. Milk bottles, baskets, buckets, etc. I chucked them all in my car and I went the next day and I was like, all right, guys, come on, let's go for a little walk. And so I gathered up all my grade 1s and we went down to the sand pit and we all sat together and we spoke about volume, and we explored volume by using the sand and filling up our buckets to being full or half or empty. And we did that for a little while. We exchanged different volume containers and it was really fun. It was interactive, all the things that you want to be observing as a teacher. Anywho, so we went back to the classroom, and back then, I'm not sure if it's still used in mainstream education today, but there were the signpost math books, like the books that the children have to fill in. And she's like, make sure that you do those pages with the children. So the children then had that page open and they had to shade, pretend buckets into half and full and empty. Anyway, long story short, she comes back in absolutely raging at me going, did you take the children out to the sand pit? You're supposed to be working through the textbook with them and they're supposed to complete all the pages and you're supposed to mark them off. And she was so mad at me. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I figured we can come back to it later. We just wanted to go outside and do some experiments, etc., etc. She wasn't having any of it. She was fuming. The next day, I got a call from the university from a coordinator saying that the teacher had actually put in a formal complaint about my teaching style to the uni, saying that I was not cut out to be a teacher.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was just an absolute dagger to the heart. So the university said, look, mate, we're going to come out and see you in the next few days. Just put together, we had a portfolio we had to put together at the time. She's like, get your portfolio together. Let's sit down and talk about what's happened. So anyway, the coordinator came out. We talked through the scenario of what's happened. She went through my portfolio and she's like, mate, don't even worry about it. Look, we're going to pass you. Just get through the next little while. Like, I was only halfway through this 6-month internship at this stage. She's like, just get through it. Keep doing you, mate. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it on the other end, but you're fine. You will pass. And that infuriated my teacher, my prac teacher. She was not happy. And she actually didn't talk to me for the rest of my practicum. She just completely blocked me out. So it was incredibly uncomfortable. And to the point actually where on my very last day, I'm being a very polite person, I went in with my bottle of wine and box of chocolates in my car to say, you know, thank you so much for being my prac teacher. And she actually refused to come out and say goodbye. So by the end of that prac, I was done. And it really broke me, and I didn't want to teach anymore. I was like, I'm just not good enough to be a teacher. This is obviously a really bad decision in terms of my career trajectory. I'm out. So I'm just going to finish university, and then I'm going to have to think about what I'm going to do on the other end. And so in our final year at James Cook, it's like I said before, it's an intern year where you do your first 6 months in a school. And then the last year you do a mini thesis, and you specialize in a particular area. So I specialized in ESL for ATSE learners. Being in North Queensland, I felt like that was an important area to study. And I got through it, and I finished my degree and went, well, that's that. I don't know what I'm going to do now. And my literal sliding door moment, the light bulb moment, was I went to a wedding, my cousin's wedding, must have been in the October of that year. And I happened to actually run into one of the teachers that was a co-teacher, another one of the grade 1 teachers from that school. Not the mean Mrs. Trenchbull Matilda reference teacher, but one of the nice ones. And she's like, mate, I'm so sorry that was your experience at our school. I'm like, oh, you know, that's all right, is what it is. And she's like, look, don't give up yet. It'll be fine. Just get through it. And then she's like, have you ever heard of Montessori before? I'm like, no, because they don't teach you about Montessori at university. Get out. I think the only time I heard Montessori was in one lecture in our first year, Education 101. This is teaching, there are some alternative education systems out there. Anyway, moving on. You know, that's all you really, really hear about it. Could be different today. So no, I've never really heard of Montessori before. She's like, go home and have a look at Montessori. It might be what you're looking for as a teacher. And so I went home and I looked at what Montessori was and went, you know, actually, I think this is what I am in terms of my heart of what I want to be as a teacher, but also reflecting on all of that garbage I just spoke to you about in terms of my backstory is how I am as a learner too, because it was that hands-on learning that actually activated my love of learning. And so I finished my degree, and this was the November. I went, oh, I better get a job, I guess. And at that stage, we decided we were going to move to the Big Smoke. My husband was a musician at the time, and he was joining a band down in Brisbane. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll look for a job in Brisbane. So I opened up Seek, and there were 2 jobs that I applied for. One of them was for a play-based centre in Everton Park, Everton Hills, and one was at Building Futures Montessori, where they were looking for an assistant. And so I went, you know what, I don't want to be a teacher right now. I'm so burnt out. I'm actually going to apply for that assistant position, and I got it. And that's where I started my Montessori journey as a Montessori, Building Futures Montessori. Yeah.
A great story of synchronicity.
Yeah.
Another synchronicity is that just this morning I listened to an interview with Scott Galloway, who I didn't know who he was before, but he is a professor of business at New York University. And he was telling the story about how when he grew up, you know, he finished high school, he applied for university in Southern California, and he didn't get in. He didn't score well enough. But he's now a professor, and he said he paid $14 million in taxes last year. Right. So he's figured out, right, how to work the system. And he was really angry, like he was railing in this interview in a very polite way about how universities in the United States, like Harvard, you know, they give their scholarships to the best of the best, right? They think that, you know, we need to reserve all of that money, all of that endowment money for people who are exceptional. But what his message was that, look, 18-year-olds are just, they're not exceptional, you know, and what we need to be doing is giving those positions to people who can show their potential, that we can, you know, they can use that opportunity to bring out their own potential rather than trying to find the best of the best and rewarding them for, you know, for having it all already. So I thought that was just your story reminded me of that interview this morning. And I guess that's one of my favorite things about Montessori is that it focuses on the potential rather than judging people and kind of pigeonholing them based on scores, you know. what are your favorite things about Montessori?
Oh gosh, that's a really, really tricky question. I think it's just part of my tapestry, and I don't I don't know. It's just part of my soul, and it's just I live and breathe Montessori. And I think it's not just my occupation, it's become part of who I am, particularly as a human being and as a parent especially. And everything that I do, or that I try to do, I try to reflect back onto the methodology and how I live my life. And I try and live my life with kindness and with peace and with respect for others, and to see the potential, exactly what you said before, seeing the potential in everybody and not just seeing a child academically or seeing a child for a talent in music or whatever. I just think that's my favorite thing about Montessori, is that it's not just a pedagogical system, it's actually a lifestyle.
Yeah, lifestyle. You said it.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
about, are there challenges in being a Montessorian? What are some of the challenges that you've had in your life as a Montessori educator?
There are a couple. I think it's, first and foremost, the one challenge I have, which isn't a particular challenge, but is describing Montessori. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm challenged on what is Montessori, I can never explain what Montessori is, especially in such a synchronous paragraph of going, what is Montessori? It's really hard to describe what Montessori is and what Montessori means to me. I think
Mm.
I think the biggest challenges that we have with Montessori is also just detailing what Montessori means in a world where anything that's different is wrong, or it's not going to be the right path. And when I explain what I do for work, I'm a Montessori teacher. They're like, oh, like a hippie. Like, what? No, not at all. And I think that, quite often we're all thrown in the same basket as our counterparts, our Steiner counterparts, where people just think that if you're part of an alternative system, then you must be a hippie and you must want to, swing to the left and rebut the system and keep up the peace man, throw up the peace sign. But I think it's really difficult to frame the work that Montessori actually does and what Montessori is at its heart, and the principles and the practices and the methodology that are attached to the method itself. I find that really, really difficult. And I find it to be a big challenge, because I do become innately a bit insulted at times. It's like, excuse me, like we're the only system which is based on science and observation when it comes to pedagogy. Like we know what we're doing. And I hate that whole pigeonholed aspect of education, particularly Montessori education, Steiner education, Reggio approach, whatever lens you want to see it through. And I don't know if anyone caught it the other night, but on Hard Quiz, is everyone familiar with the concept Hard Quiz? Yes, who was screaming at the TV going, yes, Montessori. So one of the specialty areas was Montessori this week, and that's so cool. So cool. It was Maria Montessori in her work. And I'm shamed to say there were so many questions I couldn't answer. He was throwing some hardball questions at her. And automatically the host, and he's very funny, it's his job, he's a comedian, was straight away like, oh, like a hippie, like the dreadlocks, it was that initial pigeonhole already. It's like, no, that's not the message that we want to send out. And I reflected back onto a question that you ask week out here, Mark, is how do we get the word of Montessori out there? And, we talk about, it should be a movie, or it should be whatever. What mode of delivery do we deliver Montessori? And it's really tricky. And if that's what people are hearing on a mainstream platform, that we're a bunch of crazy hippies that have dreadlocks, not that there's anything wrong with dreadlocks, I'm pro dreadlock, then I don't know how we're going to win that message. And that's a really big challenge.
Yeah, unfortunate stereotype.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you said you started as an assistant at Building Futures. How did your time at Building Futures support your potential as an
Well,
educator?
my biggest mentor's in the room with me right now, so we'll embarrass her a little. So as I said, when I entered Building Futures Montessori, I was very burnt. I was like a big to the system, and I was angry, and I was trying to re-find myself. And when I said to my friends who were graduating from the degree, that I was going into childcare to work as an assistant, they thought I had rocks in my head. Like, are you for serious? You've just done 4 years at university and you're going to become an assistant in a childcare centre. I'm like, yeah, I am. And at the time, that was what was available. I probably could have done something differently in terms of worked as a kindy teacher elsewhere, but I wanted to learn about Montessori, and I felt like that was the best approach. So I was employed as an assistant, and I stayed there just for a couple of weeks. I started over the Christmas period, which is just the trickiest period, because as many of us know who work in the early years framework, often the prepared environment is not prepared over Christmas. Often the work cycle is not running to its authentic capacity during the Christmas period. So when I walked in going, if this is Montessori, I'm not quite picking up what's being put down here. But nonetheless, the school year kicked on and I was starting to pick it up. So I went into a co-group leader role. Now, this was before the days where the kindy funding was released. I think kindy funding, correct me if I'm wrong, Vicky, was about 2010 or 2011. And so there was not really capacity for teachers to be employed at that particular time. So I stayed in that role till about 2010 as a group leader. And then I fell pregnant with my firstborn daughter. And so I took 6 months off work. And I came back to Vicky and said to Vic, I don't know if I want to go back into the classroom at the moment. I think my priorities have changed and I'm really in for this long haul. So Vicky saw my potential. Thank you, Vicky. And employed me as part of our training college. So I jumped over to our training college, Building Futures Education, and I studied my training and assessor certificate, so TAE, and I began delivering a Certificate 3 and a diploma in early childhood education. And that was really, really lovely, and I enjoyed that. Unfortunately, it was a lot of night work, which made it really tricky with a young bubby at home. And at the time, there was a shift in terms of administration at Building Futures Education, and Vicky offered me the role as a college manager. So I jumped into the deep end and learned the big, deep, dark, scary world of compliance when it comes to running a college. And it was terrifying. And it's a scary world to navigate. And I stuck it out for 13 years in that industry as a compliance officer. And it's definitely not my jam. I'm a people person, and I really don't like sitting behind a computer writing documents and writing policy procedure, but I saw the big picture. And the big picture came from, excuse the toddler, the big picture was that we saw in our industry that we were really lacking training opportunities for long daycare educators. Now, as we all know, the pathway that most of us tend to undertake is training, generally an AMI diploma, which is a 2.5-year commitment. It's quite a monetary commitment as well, and often a relocation commitment. And we know our educators. We know that. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many educators are employed with Building Futures Montessori, but there would be about 100, I'm guessing, at this stage between the three services and our family daycare. We know that they are already studying a Certificate 3 in early childhood education care. They're already then having to study a diploma in early childhood education and care. For them to then commit to then go and do a diploma is just, it's not going to happen. A diploma in Montessori, we couldn't see it happening. And we sat down and we tried to find some solutions for that. And at the time, our training college was running a non-accredited diploma of Montessori education. And we decided that we would take on the big boys at ASQA and see if we can get a Montessori diploma accredited through the vocational education system. So back in 2011, something, I can't remember now.
I think it took us about 2 years to work our way through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We began the process of getting our diploma accredited, and we did. We got it over the line. So yeah. And that was very, very exciting. So we got the diploma accredited through the vocational system, and it is recognized as a nationally accredited course. And then about 3 years ago, I began writing the Certificate 3 in Montessori Early Childhood, and that was for our junior educators, for our startup Montessorians, and we got that over the line. So we've been running that through Building Futures Education now this is its first year. So the diploma has been running for 2 years. The Certificate 3 has been running for about 6-8 9 months, losing all sense of time.
Wow.
So yeah, that was
Fantastic.
where my pathway kind of took me, was more so in curriculum development and developing those vocational education courses with a Montessori flavour.
Yeah. What was the process like with ASQA getting that approved? Was there much resistance from people who in that organization who didn't understand Montessori? Or?
I don't think much resistance to Montessori as a framework. It's about understanding it through a vocational lens. That's what's really tricky, because Montessori, the system itself, is built on a scientific approach, which has a lot of theory attached to it. And the vocational system is a lot of doing and some skills and some knowledge, whereas Montessori is a lot of knowledge and some skills in the workplace. And so it was really tricky to turn the pedagogy approach on its head to be more skill-based and be more applicable in an early childhood setting. And I mean, it works. We know how to do that because we do that every single day in our services. But to put it in the language that the vocational education system is seeking, that was where the difficulty lay. And so there was a lot of to and fro. The only other real hurdle was ensuring that we could show them that it was a necessity in our industry, that you can't just undertake a diploma in early childhood education and care and walk into a Montessori classroom. It's a completely different set of knowledge and skills. And so for them to understand that it has to be a separate commodity is a bit of a battle. But, you know, we're old hands at it now. We've been there, done that. And fingers crossed we maintain that accreditation ongoing now until the end of time. But it runs for 5 years. Every course that you get accredited, you have to renew every 5 years and re-establish its necessity in the workplace.
Yeah, so as we know, a lot of the difference in Montessori is about that personal transformation, right, of the teacher. How does that work at Building Futures Education? How do you do that personal transformation? It's something that's really hard to mandate teachers who are doing, because it's a self-reflection process, right?
Absolutely. And I'm a firm believer that you can't create a Montessorian. And I mean, that might be really controversial, but I genuinely think that if you're just here to come and play and to hang out with kids, it's probably not the right space for you. We're here to serve the children. And I feel like I said before, it's part of your tapestry, whether you know it or not, as a Montessorian. And it's very difficult to prepare an adult that isn't ready to undertake that preparation themselves and that doesn't already have it at their core. So it is a really tricky one. I mean, our industry is quite turmoil anyway by nature, the early childhood sector. People come and people go, particularly post-COVID. Post-COVID has been very testing on staff retention. And I guess we can sit back as Montessorians who have been practicing for a very long time, and you can almost observe those who are going to be here for a while. You can just tell there's just something in their aura, their presence, which show you actually this is the right system for you. I know you're going to be here for the long haul and you're here to serve the child. How we teach that at Building Futures Education, I don't think it's really teachable. You can guide 100% and you can have those really robust conversations, but you can't teach it. I truly don't think you can teach it. We working in a vocational space is all about workplace learning. And I think this is where I have a real turmoil internally with Montessori, is that I get the systems that we have in place for authentic Montessori learning, whether it be an AMI pathway or AMS pathway or NAMTA, whatever you decide that's the society decides is the most appropriate way. But I truly believe that Montessori really is better aligned through almost like an apprenticeship pathway, which is what I think vocational education does well, is that yes, you are giving them the skills and knowledge in the classroom, but you have to live it. And you have to be at a grassroots level in the classroom. You have to smell it, you have to feel it, you have to be engaging with the children. And I think that that's where it actually really lays really perfectly with the vocational education system.
And modeling, I hear you saying, I think is a big part of it at BFE, is modeling from senior educators. Absolutely.
Our trainers and assessors are very passionate Montessorians who have been part of the Montessori community for a very long time. And They are in the classrooms with the learners, observing the learners, guiding the learners, mentoring the learners. It's grassroots, it's on the floor, and it works beautifully. It really, truly does. We just don't have enough people. It's about finding enough people to be on the floor as trainers and assessors. If we had more, it'd be fantastic, but it's about spreading the team that we have the best that we can.
Yeah. Do you think that long daycare makes it difficult to do authentic Montessori today? What are the advantages and disadvantages of long daycare?
I have a lot of opinions on this, Mark. I think that there's quite a few of us in the room who are part of the early years focus group through Montessori Australia who have this conversation very regularly, that absolutely Montessori does work in a long daycare framework, 100%. It is authentic and it can be done incredibly beautifully. However, our system does make it incredibly tricky to do so. Unfortunately, we are under a framework that may not necessarily align perfectly with alternative education systems, whether it's Steiner, whether it is Montessori. Our biggest hurdle is unfortunately our national regulatory body, being a CEQA. And unfortunately, the system is not really receptive to learning about Montessori and coming into our A&R processes with a Montessori understanding. And that's our biggest hurdle currently, is that unfortunately we have these assessment and rating officers who are allocated a Montessori service that have never stepped into a Montessori environment before. Some unfortunately don't even come from an early childhood background themselves. We have had many discussions lately, and I'll just share this one little anecdote whereby a service actually had a assessor who didn't come from an early childhood background. She actually came from a manufacturing background. And we were just discussing this last week of how insane to me it is, and to everybody, I guess, who's sitting here listening potentially too, to have someone from manufacturing to come in and perform an assessment and rating in a centre, let alone a Montessori centre. Anywho, that's the biggest hurdle at the moment. And what's really sad to see is that we're observing a lot of centres across Australia who have been exceeding centres, and we know are exceptional Montessori long daycare providers who are being bumped down to meeting on our national scale. And it's incredibly insulting. It's incredibly insulting. And it's adding salt to the wound of those leaders and educators who are there to serve the child, who are there day in, day out, ensuring that they are, applying the Montessori method as authentically as they can, but are being told by our system that it's not good enough, and therefore it's only going to get a meeting rating. And unfortunately, then what I'm then observing is we're seeing a lot of centres who are having to work backwards, going, okay, well, let me read the national regulations and I'm going to work it through backwards and see if I can embed the practice first, and then look at how we can apply Montessori over the head of that. And I just think that stinks. It's not okay, and it's not fair on these leaders and these educators who are just there to do their best every single day.
What are some of the areas where this difference of conceptual difference about early childhood comes out between the assessments and Montessori? Floor bedding, for example, is one.
Floor bedding is a huge one. Yeah, so I can pull out a couple of anecdotes. So the one that we were just discussing before, whereby the A&R officer was not from an education background, she roused on the educators because the children were returning their equipment back to the shelves, and she believed that children should leave the activities on the table so that other children can use the activities too. And so like little things like that. Well, it's not a little thing, it's just part of, our process. Oh gosh, I just had another one on the top of my head that I was going to bring down. I think a big one is also our programming styles as well, is that they have a preconceived idea of what programming should look like. And quite a lot of the time it's pre-generated. So you're in a play-based center, you're observing a child and you go, well, next week I'm going to sit down and I'm going to get my smart whiteboard out and we're going to research insects, and the child is going to engage in that lesson. And we know in Montessori that we don't plan that far ahead. We are here now, and we are working with the children as it's interesting and as that child has that as their at their interest. So that's really tricky to show the scale and the way that we do program. And I don't know if that's everybody. I mean, every centre obviously programs differently, but I know that has been a massive hurdle as well. I don't know. Those who are in the early years focus group, can you think of anything else that has been a really big one as of late that has been a bit of a battle for services?
I think a lot of it's around the independence given to children and things like cutting food, and that can sometimes alarm assessment and rating officers. I mean, I just did a survey. Did you get that this morning, Vicky? The compilation of the survey from.
Oh yes, I got that from you this morning. Thank you. I haven't finished.
Oh no, that's all right.
Sent that into
and I sent it to you too, Liz. So we sent a survey out last July, and so we've gone through, and I just sat down over the weekend and did a content analysis of it, and it was very difficult because we're then going to use that with various authorities, but it was very difficult not to have it come across as so damning. So this was responses from people within the sector, not all Montessorians either, just generally early childhood, but the way that they were saying very much the same things you were saying, Cara, about being demoralised, unsupported, that it's about documentation compliance, about lots of comments about bias of AO officers coming, authorised officers coming in and already having this very personal opinion about what Montessori was going to be like, and then making their judgments around that. Many of them unqualified. It was damning, and then we got a fairly good turnout. It was 50 responses.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so and that's pretty great, pretty good for us. Right across the states.
Great data.
Yeah. So yeah, but it was quite heartbreaking. And I know that was July, but in terms of the research world, that's not that far away. And I don't know that the situation's improved. So, pretty sad, actually, really because you can see that the sector is struggling, and they're very clear. And that those who they've lost faith in that whole assessment system, and that you could see that the ones who were coping, it was because they were resigned to it. They weren't actually using it as a way to reflect. Like, they're going to reflect on their best practice and keep doing that. But it was almost like despite the way that they'd been treated in that process. And that was, I would say, I mean, I haven't got the stats in front of me now, but that was probably about 80%, 90% of respondents were saying that. Yeah. But anyway, don't want to hog the conversation, sorry.
Thank you, Alex. That's great. Yeah, that's terrifying.
Cara, has there ever been anything you've heard in an A&R that made you think, oh, maybe we should think about the way we do this? So, are there any aspects of Montessori that you think could be updated that maybe
I'm definitely not the right person to ask that question. I thankfully never went through an A&R process during my time in the classroom. I think that we need to be critical thinkers, and we need to reflect always. It's part of our transformation, because I don't feel like you're transformed and you're done. We're always transforming. And I mean, yeah, I suppose so. I can't think of anything particularly off the top of my head where I'm like, oh, that's absolutely 100% an area that we should work through. But I think that you should still be open to the process, because, I mean, at the end of the day, the A&R process does have its time and place, and it is, a reflective tool. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't go in your favor. And I don't think that we should be so, I can't quite think of the word. We're not perfect. Montessori is not perfect. It never will be perfect. One system is not the only system that's going to work for everyone. So, but yeah, unfortunately, Mark, I can't quite think of one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you had anybody else?
I just think that the system is used to humiliate services that are not achieving someone's idea of what is good quality, and to potentially therefore threaten the viability of their business. And because it's all very public, and I just think it's such the antithesis of the Montessori approach, which is to build up and nurture from where people are. So it's like services are attempting to translate and find the good in a system that uses abuse, because we have legislation that says we're not allowed to humiliate children, as we should have, and yet we work under a tool that's designed to humiliate us if we don't achieve what we're supposed to achieve. And unless a CEQA can reconcile their own inconsistencies in their approach versus their legislation, it's always going to sit there as a problematic cultural imposition on the educational services that we're offering.
It's such an interesting contradiction. And I guess that's really what assessment and grading is all about in mainstream education, right?
Yeah.
Judgment and humiliation. Cara, you gave us a little bit of a teaser earlier about some of the projects that MCF is working on up there. Can you expand on some of those?
Yeah, really, really exciting times ahead. So as I mentioned earlier, I relocated to Cairns in December in the middle of a flood and a cyclone. Do not recommend. But things are kind of coming up on the up now. So settling into Cairns life. And as I mentioned, I'm doing some part-time work with MCF, and that's fantastic. So currently the way that MCF operates up here in Cairns in terms of being on the floor is that we have a play group called the Montessori Children's Foundation Raising Kids play group, which runs Monday, Tuesdays and Thursdays from a little beautiful prepared environment, which is facilitated by 3 First Nations women who have also undertaken Montessori training themselves, and they are doing an exceptional job. So the big goal that we have in our little pockets at the moment is actually to expand on our playgroup and to build Cairns' first Montessori school. So that's incredibly exciting. So that's the goal at the moment, and it's standing in a corner going, oh my goodness, where do I even begin when it comes to building a school and an early childhood centre? And I'm very grateful that I've got an amazing community around me, including some people in the room who are playing part in that development. So we are literally at the very, very, very start of developing this school and the childcare centre. So it's very exciting. And it's not just exciting in terms of professionally, like I'm very excited to be part of this movement. I'm very excited for Cairns and Far North Queensland, because unfortunately Brisbane is the closest Montessori, or I guess no, Noosa is the closest Montessori school we have to Cairns, 1,500 kilometres away. There is no long daycare service in Cairns that has an alternative education approach. We have a Steiner school up the hill at Kuranda, but that's the closest you'll find. But what I'm really excited about is it's also offering opportunity to my own children too. So I'm a mum of 3 little people, and I've got a 12-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a little buddy who's 2.5. And I was very blessed for my 2 eldest children to go through Montessori, through Building Futures Montessori, up until they started prep. And one of my biggest regrets that I have in terms of the move is not staying down in Brisbane long enough for my youngest son to finish cycle 1 through Montessori. So that's really sad. And our little fellow is nonverbal autistic. We're going through the diagnosis at the moment, and he is a little sensory learner. He learns through touch and smell and taste and exploring his world. And I know he will thrive in a Montessori environment and hopefully find his voice one day. And I hope that the Montessori school kicks off so that I can put my own child through the system as well and nurture that little dude. So yeah, very exciting times, very exhausting times, and very much where do you even begin when it comes to developing such an exciting project? But no, it's going to be great.
What do you think are some of the challenges in getting Montessori more widely recognised in Australia?
That's a really tricky question. Every time you ask this each time, I think, what would I say back to that? And I really don't know. I think it's about education, and I think it's about accessibility. I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we've only got a handful of Montessori schools within this country, a couple of dozen. We have, 300-ish early childhood settings that are Montessori inspired or Montessori in their name. And I feel like they're very city-centric. So for us in the rural and remote communities, we don't have access to Montessori. In terms of like its challenge, I think it comes down to what we were saying before about even like I did not know what Montessori was, and I was an education student. That's so embarrassing, that situation. Because have you heard of Montessori? I'm like, no. And I think that we need to not only look at its accessibility at schools and centres, we need to think about where it comes from. And I think the education system itself, particularly on a tertiary level, needs to look at having Montessori pathways. And I know that there have been many attempts in the past to get a postgraduate program in Montessori, and I hope that happens sooner rather than later. But I think that the actual bachelors themselves need to look at embedding alternative education approaches from day one and look at what's Montessori, what is Steiner, what is Reggio approach, actually introduce us to that at a grassroots level from day one, so we have that knowledge from the start and we can only grow and develop it. I think also, though, it also needs to be embedded better in our diploma and certificate 3 of early childhood education and care as well. And unfortunately, because of our frameworks, they've had to develop this certificate 3 and this diploma, which is not really looking at I don't want to make it damning. It's not looking at different systems. It's not looking at different approaches. It's not developing a lot of critical thinking in terms of serving the children. And I do hope that when a rewrite occurs, that we do allow our vocational education students to be exposed to a different system early on as well.
So getting Montessori into the public system more and also into universities.
Absolutely.
That's a good answer. Very practical.
Because it has to come from us. I mean, as the teachers and as the educators, if we don't even know about these systems and we're not taught about them to become passionate, how are you going to have your next generation of directresses and as guides and as Montessorians? It's just not going to happen. And unfortunately, I don't know how you would even begin to start having those conversations with tertiary institutions. Where do you even begin?
Yeah. We've started to look at that in Montessori Australia, and also the Transforming Transforming Education Australasia group, which is an alliance between various alternative education organisations. We've been looking at how to approach universities to get more awareness of various alternatives, not just Montessori.
Great.
And one of our focuses is about getting Montessori into the public system.
That's great, Mark. That's really great to hear.
Cara, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. You were worried about whether you could speak for an hour, but I think we could go on for another 2.
Oh, thanks, team. That was great. Great. Thank you, everyone who came tonight. I really appreciate it. Marvelous.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
See you. Good night.
See you.